What's up guys, Hand Andre here, show off something kinda cool about the Nintendo Switch. But before we can show it off, we have to go back in time to the Nintendo Wii to provide proper context for what we're about to show you. So one of the cool things about the Wii, or in fact the main thing about the Wii, was the fact it had motion controls. But as part of that, it did something really cool that I feel like it's kind of almost overlooked really, is that it allowed for really accurate pointer controls, allowing you to point at the TV and move the cursor around perfectly. It was like a mouse for your TV, it worked great. It always knew exactly where you're pointing at no matter what. And that's for two important reasons, or rather one important reason, but it's broken up into two components. One, there is the infrared sensor bar on top of the controller, and that allows you to see the two infrared lights on top of the, or in the sensor bar on top of the TV. So that way, whenever the controller can see those lights, it knows, the system knows exactly where you're pointing at the screen, and it's brilliant. So you can move it around wherever you want, it's always calibrated, it never loses track of what's going on. It worked great. Now, granted, it wasn't perfect, and one of the problems was, despite what I just said of it never losing track, that only holds true when you're pointing it at the TV. Because if you point it away from the TV, or more specifically, away from the sensor bar, it has no idea where you're aiming. It has no idea what's going on with the controller, it just didn't know. Now, for the most part, in games where you're only using it as a pointer, that's no big deal. Because it didn't matter what you're aiming for off screen. But in games like a shooting game, where the gun would end up, pointing at the, at one end of the screen, and also that's how turning was, used as well. You'd point off screen to turn. That can introduce some issues with the gun like jerking around and reappearing on another side of the TV when you point at the TV again. And it also just resulted in some jerky movement. Again, not a big deal for most games, but some it was. Now, one of the games that worked really well in is World of Goo, because it used it as just a pointer like this, and it worked super well. Now, World of Goo has reappeared on the Nintendo Switch, but the Nintendo Switch doesn't have a sensor bar or an infrared camera really on top of the controller. So how does it work? Well, let's go over to the Switch and take a look at what's going on there. And Hand Andre is back, but this time he's holding a right Joy-Con because we're playing on the Nintendo Switch. Now, as a quick reminder, there are no pointer controls on the Switch itself. As you can see, we're moving it around, it doesn't do anything. You have to use the control stick to do anything on the main OS, or in the main OS. But, as you can also see, we have World of Goo downloaded, so let's go and start it up here, because as I said before, pointer controls are pretty essential to World of Goo. I don't even know how the game could work without them. So let's see what happens when we start up on the Switch and how it works on this console. Alright, so we're going to hit A here, and right away it's going to ask us to set the Joy-Con on a flat surface, so we're going to do that. And this may already be reminding you of something, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Alright, so it's calibrated, and it's asking us now to point at the screen and hit the plus button there. So we're going to do that, we're going to aim and point, or point and hit the button. And look, we have a cursor on the screen, and it's already moving around just like on the Wii, so that is pretty cool. It's remarkably accurate. Look at that, we can move it around wherever, and it's moving pretty much exactly in accordance to how we're pointing at the screen. It's pretty accurate, and it's super responsive, like, it's really responsive. So let's go ahead and hit OK here. And it's going to give us the more standard World of Goo cursor. And again, it feels really good. Let's go to the menu real quick, just so we can get the hand icon again. It's a little bit easier to work with. So yeah! So this is pretty impressive, especially given the fact, again, there's no sensor bar on the Switch and no IR camera on top. Now granted, this has an IR camera on the bottom of the right Joy-Con, but it's not used for pointing purposes, plus you'd have to hold it upside down if that were the case. And again, even if it were used for that, there's no sensor bar, so it couldn't work in that case unless they gave you a sensor bar later on. So what's going on here? Well, as it turns out, the right Joy-Con, or both Joy-Cons even, contain gyroscopes. And gyroscopes allow you to detect movement from a set location. So anytime you move the controller from a set position, it knows how far roughly you move from that point, and then we move it back, same thing. So it's basically able to tell how far you're moving it from the original location you set it up at. That's why it asks us to point at the screen and to hit plus. But that's also where one of the problems comes into play, because gyroscopes are a relative technology, as I just said. So it can detect how far you moved it roughly and how far you moved it back, and it's mostly accurate as long as you keep pointing at the screen. But if you start doing some broader movements, like let's say I swing it around a lot like this, it starts to lose track of where you're pointing. As you can see, I'm pointing at the TV, and the cursor's way to the right. Now, as I said when we start up the screen, or when we start up the game, if you just hit plus and pointing at the TV, it automatically recenters it. So yeah, it actually works pretty well, and we've seen something like this before, both on the PlayStation and PlayStation Move, as well as on the Wii itself with Skyward Sword. Because believe it or not, but the pointer controls in Skyward Sword actually use the exact same gyroscope technology. Granted, this is probably a newer and more accurate one, but it's the exact same principle, where instead of using the sensor bar and pointer, it actually detected how far relatively you move the controller in order for the pointer controls to work. However, there was one important distinction, because even though it really didn't use a sensor bar back then, you could play without the sensor bar in general even, it did use a sensor bar for one important thing, and that's the fact that whenever you aim back at the TV, it could see the sensor bar and would recalibrate your controls. So that way, they would never become uncalibrated like you're seeing it in this video, where even me just sitting here, the cursor's drifting to the right. And that's actually what it's called. It's called Gyroscopic Drift, because again, it knows roughly how far you're moving from the set position, then back again. It just doesn't know it precisely, and that adds up over time, resulting in the decalibration you're seeing here, with the cursor not appearing quite exactly where it should relative to how we're aiming it at the TV. Whereas with the Wii, it was absolute, where it knew exactly where you're pointing at the screen thanks to the sensor bar and the IR camera. Except again, that didn't apply to games using the Wii Motion Plus accessory, which includes Skyward Sword and Wii Sports Resort. But in both of those cases, once again, it used the sensor bar for recalibration, which did result in a slightly better experience than what you're seeing here, simply because it would recalibrate automatically instead of demanding you do it manually using the plus button. But we are kind of splitting hairs here, because it works really well on the Switch, at least in World of Goo, and we would love to see it extended to other games as well, and I'm sure we will at some point. But even to the OS as well. It would be super cool if you could go to the home screen and just point at the next game you want to play. But maybe they'll add that in a future update or something. Anyways guys, there you have it. I just wanted to explain how it works in World of Goo and what it could mean for the future of the Switch, and compare that to how it worked on the Wii. So hopefully you found this video to be at least a little bit informative, and if you did, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already for lots more on the Nintendo Switch and Nintendo in general. Catch you later, bye.